Today we are going to have a fascinating presentation by political cartoonist Ben Sargent. And there was so much interesting information about his background. I'm going to have to edit this severely and just hit the highlights. I couldn't even begin to tell you all the awards he's won and leadership positions he's held. He's a sixth-generation Texan born in Amarillo, and he was born into a newspaper family. At age 12, he learned the printing page. And he started working for the local daily as a proofreader at age 14. He went to Amarillo College and then received a Bachelor of Journalism from UT in 1970. He worked as a reporter for 5 years, covering the state capitol and working for the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, the Long News Service, the Austin American Statesman, and the United Press International. He started drawing cartoons for the American Statesman in 1974 and then became full-time as a cartoonist in 2009. What a wonderful occupation to have. He was then distributed nationally by Universal Press Syndicate. He is the winner of the 1982 Pulitzer Prize for Editorial Cartooning, and he's been a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 2001 and 2002. He won an award from Cox Newspapers, Best of Cox for Editorial Cartooning, 1996, 99, and 2008. I'm hitting only the highlights here. He was cited by the Austin Chronicle as the best reason to read The Statesman in 2008. The Texas Civil Rights Project gave him the Molly Ivins Give 'em Hell Award. He's a member of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, and he has been president of that in 1988 and 1989. He also is the founding director of the Austin Steam Train Association, and he is qualified as a steam locomotive fireman, brakeman, and conductor. He's also an amateur letterpress printer, and he has a shop where he has a 1905 Chandler and Price job press. He also serves as a lay Eucharist minister at St. David's Episcopal Church. He's written a couple of books, Texas State House Blues in 1980 and Big Brother Blues in 1984. He's married to Diane Holloway, who is a retired American Statesman television critic, and they have 2 children and a granddaughter as well. Let's give a warm welcome to Ben Sargent.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. Is this thing working now? I dropped it at one point, and so I wanted to make sure. Let me move it down a little. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come over to the UU Church. I've been here before, and really always enjoy speaking to this group about editorial cartoons and what we as editorial cartoonists do. So let me see if I can fire up the slides here. Oops. No, I don't know if I want to leave. Let's not leave yet. Well, first of all, let me just run through sort of the process of coming up with an editorial cartoon real briefly, and then to go a little deeper, talk about kind of how pictures function and how pictures make a particularly apt medium for political opinions. Here we go. It starts by absorbing the day's events. Listening to that inspiration that will turn raw opinion into a killer image. And you see the cartoonist about 8 acres of Bristol board. bouncing the results off the powers that be. Distilling the idea into ink on Bristol board. And if the tune is a hit, receiving the accolades of the public, of course. Let me start out by showing you a picture that I think is a particularly interesting and profound picture here. It was a painting that was done by the Belgian surrealist René Magritte in 1929. And I know everyone in this place can speak French, but if you don't, it says, "This is not a pipe." And that seems sort of counterintuitive. You look at it, and it looks like a pipe, but then when you think a little deeper, you can't pack it, you can't light it, you can't smoke it, because it's just paint on canvas. In fact, this is not paint on canvas. This is a projection of a photograph of just through multiple iterations there. But when your mind looks at it, it says that's a pipe. And that's because pictures, I think, have a particular power to penetrate right to your subconscious and make an impression. I think it would probably be difficult for anyone to look at this very simple little drawing and not see a human face, because that's just kind of how pictures work. They're icons, they're symbols, and I think essentially every picture is a symbol, whether it's a simple symbol or a complicated symbol, or even an incomprehensible symbol. It's all symbolism. And cartoons in particular are sort of geared to that function of pictures, of carrying meaning through symbolism. There's a very good book called Understanding Comics by a man named Scott McCloud, where he said the ability of cartoons to focus our attention on an idea is an important part of their special power. Cartooning isn't just a way of drawing, it's a way of seeing. And I think that's how editorial cartoonists particularly look at their work, and this is sort of an old expression of it from the time of World War I. And James Montgomery Flagg, who of course was a very famous American illustrator, and did a little bit of editorial cartooning, but drew this picture, drew himself very handsome, you'll notice, making the Kaiser confront his evil deeds. And the important part for cartoonists is the caption down at the bottom, "The cartoonist makes people see things." And I think that's how editorial cartooning functions, and how cartoonists like to think that it works, is that the cartoonist can see a particular angle on public events and on the news, and wants to kind of focus people on that, and can use his picture to make people see things in the way he sees them. Just to kind of illustrate that, here's written newspaper opinion. It's not a particular thing. It's just a piece of a written column. And it's the subject is the relationship of President Obama with the Democrats in Congress. And you can see how compelling it is. And then here is a cartoon about the same subject. And you can see how the symbolism works to kind of wonderfully concentrate the mind instead. So I think all editorial cartoons really depend upon symbolism to make people see things and to carry the message that the cartoonist is trying to get across. And sometimes it may not be some overt symbol. It may just be making a picture, a situation that is representative of something else. Like in this picture of a swimming pool. Whoops, there we go. This. Can everybody? Is our picture big enough here that everybody can read the type in the cartoons? Okay. Well, I can. And it shows the Wall Street fellow going by in his yacht and telling the American family sitting on the roof, says, "Hey, hell of a storm, wasn't it?" Some of the symbols we use are overt symbols, and they're things that are very useful for cartoonists because they can be used to represent so many things, and sort of are a short route to conveying an idea. Uncle Sam is one that, of course, immediately comes to mind. Here he is. The Supreme Court is rushing, the Bush Court rushing out of the building, and he's saying integration, equal pay, choice, access to the courts. Anybody seen the rights we won over the last 50 years? But you can see how Uncle Sam here can represent a lot of different things. He can represent the American people, the United States in general, the American government, whatever you need to fit him into the cartoon. But he's sort of an all-purpose symbol. Here he is again, a little older cartoon, different versions of President Clinton. This is one we drew when on the bicentennial of President Lincoln's birth. He's telling the little girl, looking at the Constitution, saying 55 men wrote it, one man kept it whole. And here's one that's not mine. It's really by a colleague of mine named Michael Ramirez, who at that time was with the Los Angeles Times. And this appeared a day or two after the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington in 2001. And shows Uncle Sam, and it's a very simple cartoon, a very simple drawing, and he just looks at the reader and says, "All right, who's with me?" and rolling up his sleeve. And you can see how there's not much to the cartoon, but it conveys quite a bit of meaning through that symbol of Uncle Sam. And I thought it was interesting. Our librarian at the paper, after we ran this in the paper, said she had dug up another cartoon that there was a man named M.A. Dunham, I think, that worked for the Statesman back in the 30s and 40s. Dunning. Don't know much else about him except that he was drawing cartoons for the Statesman back in those days. And this cartoon appeared the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. So you can see it's essentially the same idea, the same setup, and Uncle Sam's even rolling up the same sleeve. But I thought it was an interesting example of how a powerful symbol can still have resonance over the course of 60 years there. Another very useful symbol that we use a lot is in fact I used it in my cartoon in the Statesman this morning, was the Statue of Liberty, because she's sort of multi-purpose as well. She can represent liberty, democracy, the American ideal, free speech, civil liberties, whatever you sort of fit her into the cartoon to use. In this case, she has a label that says democracy, but still identifiable as the Statue of Liberty by her torch of liberty and her crown. And this cartoon also gave me an opportunity to draw a steam locomotive, which is always welcome. She is again. The torch snuffed out. Here she is all covered up, but you can still see the torch and crown that identify her as representative of our rights and liberties. And here we see sort of an evil-looking Uncle Sam down in the corner there. Again, after 9/11, she was very much brought into service by cartoonists. I didn't in particular do a weeping Statue of Liberty, but I understand that 50 or 60 people did from my friends in the syndication industry. Here was one of them, was again Mike Ramirez. A very simple cartoon, but I think very powerful for that day, and uses the image of the Statue of Liberty as a very powerful symbol of what had happened. Another one's from my colleague Signe Wilkinson in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Daily News, who did this one. Again, using the Statue of Liberty as the symbol. And I kind of like this one better. It has a little more optimistic cast to it, showing the torch of liberty rising above the flames of the terrorist attack. Of course, another symbol that we use a lot that's very handy and are the donkey and elephant to represent our two main political parties. And they were both invented by the same man in the in the late 19th century. There was a young German immigrant named Thomas Nast who sort of became the first nationally known political cartoonist in America and dominated his field from about the time of the Civil War up into to the end of the 1880s. But he invented not only the donkey and the elephant, but kind of the way we think of Uncle Sam looking and the way we think of Santa Claus looking. So a very influential cartoonist. Supposedly this is the first representation of the Democratic Party with a donkey. It's in one of Nast's cartoons. It shows the Democrats criticizing the Lincoln Secretary of War. And this is supposedly the first representation, of the Republican Party with an elephant. Now, Brother Nast's cartoons are so seething with symbolism and labels and everything that I couldn't tell you what this cartoon is about. I'm not sure the readers of that day could, but it does show the Republican vote as an elephant, and from then on it was off to the races with the donkey and elephant. Here's one with both the donkey and elephant. What's holding up my immigration special? Seems some competence issues have arisen in the kitchen. The elephant again. In my retirement, I may go to work for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey because I've become so adept at drawing elephants. They're all cleaned up. The Republican legislature. Mr. and Mrs. Elephant. Too much tea. And the Democratic donkey shown here is the mother donkey with her new offspring and her old offspring. And she's reading from the child care book. Often an older sibling will react to the family's new addition with pouting, resentment, and surliness. Also shows how great President Obama is as a caricature, because you can draw him from behind and he's almost more recognizable than from the front because of his... yes, sir. The donkey is looking at a book that says child care, and she's quoting from the book, often an older sibling will react to the family's new addition with pouting, resentment, and surliness. So, again, the donkey and a couple of donkeys and the elephant. I thought I sent you up here to shut this down. The deficit orgy. Maybe one of the oldest overt symbols we use, because it's from the book of Genesis, is the dove of peace, which is a cartoon from 1996, a long time ago, having to do with Northern Ireland. Damn it, not again. And usually recognizable by her olive branch. And when I have used the dove of peace, I would frequently get a call saying, "What did that chicken in your cartoons?" or dove. Another very old one from the scriptures, probably from the book of Revelation, is the figure of death, the Grim Reaper, which again is a very powerful symbol and easy to use. Again, you see Uncle Sam there, and the Reaper is saying, "You, the guy who ordered the neocon fantasy in Iraq, I'm here to collect the bill," which at that time was 3,000 deaths. Now the bill has accrued interest, as we know. Some other symbols are just sort of not quite as set in stone, but certainly function as symbols. Like anytime in one of my cartoons you see the big fat guy with the cigar and in the tiny little pince-nez glasses, it usually represents the big money interests. Here he is coming by with the state government in a shopping cart. It seems like the shopping season starts earlier every year. And of course, for cartoonists, one of our favorite types of symbolism that we use is caricature, because you really can have some fun with that. And it's a sort of symbolism where you take not just the facial features, but the way of speaking, way of acting, different characteristics of an actual figure in the public arena and use that to get across the meaning of your cartoon. Here's one caricature of President Clinton. Choices, choices. And of course, when Bill Clinton first began running for president, all the cartoons were debating whether you go with his hair or with his chin, because you couldn't get both into one panel. It would just fill it up too much. I think everybody kind of went with his chin and his nose. Here he is again. A lady with on her purse it says feminists, and she's saying, Mr. President, in view of your longtime support of women's issues, we're at least reserving judgment on all these allegations. And then in the thought balloon, Randy Swine. And the President says, thank you, I appreciate your confidence. And in the thought balloon, nice tush. And sometimes you can caricature a figure even without them even being in the picture. You see the little boy saying, define cookie, and the mother is saying, don't you Clinton me, young man. And of course, this also illustrates the little kid and the cookie jar setup, without which I don't think there would be any editorial cartooning. We couldn't do without it. It's almost as vital as the guy on the desert island setup for magazine cartoonists. It's in fact, here's one from a few years later with another president rating the Social Security surplus. He says, well, I must say I resent your tone of suspicion. And you can see that the mother has on the same dress, and they even have the same linoleum on the floor. But it's a very useful setup. Another one of President Bush. It's amazing stuff. You can bend it, cut it, twist it, drill it, crumple it, shave it, warp it, slice it, mold it, make it fit anything. A handyman's dream. And here's the truth there. One of my favorite presidents, the caricature, is again, he left that damn thing lying around. His imperial presidency regalia. And as we mentioned a little earlier, President Obama, who's also a wonderful president to caricatures, is another record shattered in his inbox. There as he arrived for his new job. He's a tall, skinny guy with sort of a real characteristic way of standing. And I remember during the 2008 election, the New York Times did an op-ed piece where they got several famous caricaturists to give us your caricature of various candidates who were running at that time. And Barry Blitt did one of Obama and showed him from behind, just kind of standing there like this. But it was clearly President Obama because of the very characteristic shape of his head, and in particular those ears. It's a caricaturist's dream. You can see him drawn from behind again. Where they go to die, elephants, armadillos, good ideas. Well, through the history of American newspaper cartooning, which when you think about it is not all that much time, maybe 150 years or so. There have been very many very influential editorial cartoonists. We had already spoken of Thomas Nast. Here's his caricature of William Marcy Tweed, the political boss of New York City, whom Nast pretty much single-handedly brought down with his cartoons. They had that much power and that much sway. At one point, Nast is supposed to have said to one of his lieutenants, I don't care what the papers write about me, my constituents can't read, but they can sure see pictures. Stop them damn pictures. Then around the time of World War I, the sort of the style of cartooning was very much affected by a lot of the radical cartoonists working in those days. Boardman Robinson, in this case, Art Young, some of that group. They had a very strong drawing style and very powerful pictures. A little later, Bill Malden. I had to, when at the turn of the 21st century, they had asked me to help lay out a couple of pages of cartoons from the 20th century, and And I sort of picked this one out as I thought would be very, if I had to pick the single most powerful cartoon to me of that century, it was Bill Malden's drawing that ran when President Kennedy was assassinated. He was a very influential cartoonist, and of course, sort of the king of all was Herb Locke at the Washington Post, who was at the Washington Post for almost 70 years, and kept on doing very powerful, very strong editorial cartooning over that entire period. And here you see one of his, I think, best cartoons from during the McCarthy era. And of course, the power that these gentlemen had in their cartoons derived a lot from the nature of media and the nature of newspapers in their time. That it was something that newspapers in that day permeated all of daily life, and that was the principal place. Newspapers and later traditional broadcast journalism was where people got their information, and so a cartoon in a newspaper was something that on a given day everyone in that community would see, and the people being depicted would see, and it gave them a special power that sort of has faded and has changed as the nature of media has changed and the way that people receive their information has changed. It's all still in flux. Here's a cartoon about newspapers and democracy. Uncle Sam saying, "Anybody seen The Watchdog?" And a lot of big brains are pondering these issues, and I don't know how it's all going to come out. I don't know how print newspapers will come out. But I think it's essential that the kind of function that newspapers performed for so long needs to be done. The journalism still needs to be done if we're going to have a free and democratic society. Somebody needs to leave the light on for democracy. And now when I started editorial cartooning, we were still back in the golden days of newspapers. In the mid-'70s, there were, probably at that time, there were 250 or more full-time staff newspaper cartoonists in the United States. We all regarded ourselves as the knights errant of the newsroom and the bad boys of the editorial page, and that envisioned that politicians were just trembling at our every pen stroke. And of course, as the media on which we depended for that fantasy has declined, that has changed a great deal. Whoops. This is a drawing by my colleague Rob Rogers at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that probably reflects more accurately the position of editorial cartoonists now. It may be expensive, but I'm indispensable to this newspaper. And the publisher is saying, "Is your name Newsprint?" And now there are fewer than 70 full-time staff cartoonists in the United States. There are more people in the United States Senate than there are full-time editorial cartoonists. But certainly what the cartoonist does and what he deals with is still there. Public life is still there, and our very robust and free democracy is still there, and needs the kinds of things that cartoonists were doing. Here's another sort of self-portrait by my friend Signe Wilkinson in Philadelphia about another good day for cartooning. And so whether the traditional editorial cartoon survives in some other form, and as we hope the print newspaper survives in some other form, there's still a need to make people see things. And as Brother Flagg said in this drawing. And as long as we have this, there'll be a need for this. But let me stop there. And Bonnie, did you want to lead the questioning session so you can describe?
In light of the cartoon today. Can you give us some hope for the future of this country so that we don't become like Russia, where all the money rules and democracy is threatened?
Well, it certainly looks a little bleak right now, especially after the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which allowed pretty much just free play of money in our political system. So I don't know exactly at this point what's going to kind of get that back under control. I don't know if it takes legislation or what, but it certainly takes public awareness of the influence of money in political campaigns and in legislating and in the conduct of public life, and just being aware of how much power and how much increased power over the last few years that the moneyed interests have. And so I guess that's the first step, is just awareness, and then trying to find political solutions to that problem. Because as Justice Brandeis said many years ago, we can have, I'm not quoting exactly, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was to the sense of, we can have a large, powerful, moneyed interest in this country, or we can have a free and open democracy, but we can't have both. So I think it just starts with awareness, and then goes from there to whatever solutions we can think of. I'm not sure where we are on that gradient right now.
Would you please stand and say your name?
I'm Alice Harris. I wanted to know, how did you get your start? How did you figure out this is what I want to do? And, how did you jump into finding a spot for yourself in there?
Well, in my case, and I guess it's different from a lot of cartoonists, and probably from the majority of my colleagues, that I sort of fell into it. I had been drawing all my life, but it never occurred to me that I was going to wind up drawing for a living until I was doing it. As Bonnie said, I grew up in a newspaper family and naturally gravitated to that business. Got a journalism degree, and I thought I was going to be a reporter my whole life. And while I was a reporter at the Statesman, started doing some drawings kind of on the side to illustrate people's features and stuff like that. I left the Statesman, went to work for the Wire Service for a couple of years, kept on doing the drawings for the Statesman, and after a couple of years they came back and asked me if I wanted to come over and draw full time. And I thought, well, I'm kind of a mediocre reporter, I'll give this a shot. And then my career was stalled at that point for 35 years. So, I really feel very lucky and fortunate that I was able to fall into that job, because I have enjoyed it very much, and I feel like I was very, very lucky to be able to do it. And as we said, sort of during a golden age of American newspapering in the 70s and 80s, and so I just, unlike there are a lot of kids now who are sort of struggling and working hard to try to become cartoonists and trying to find some little break, and so I feel very lucky that I just happened to fall into it.
Thank you for the excellent presentation and the great cartoons. You mentioned at one point the need for strong newspapers for democracy and the importance of a free press. I was wondering if you could comment on what limitations you would encounter in terms of picking a controversial topic to satirize. I don't know, just an example like gay marriage or something like that, whether or not, but I'm sure you can get better examples.
As an editorial cartoonist, or really as any kind of editorialist sort of faces that challenge, because there is, on a given day, there is so much in the public arena and so much that's going on, and things that are of varying degrees of actual importance, and some things that are very important, some are very, very high up on the page and everybody knows about them. Some things that are very important that people don't know about, and same with things that are not important. There are some of those that they're not important, but people know a lot about them. So it's kind of this great range of topics that you sort of have to each day zero in on something. And for a cartoonist, it's sort of there's an extra challenge, because you, unlike if you were writing a column, you can kind of explain that this is what this column is about. And For a cartoon, you want your reader, as soon as he looks at the cartoon, to kind of know what you're talking about. And so you're kind of, it sort of begins to narrow your scope to things that the reader is already very aware of. And then another aspect of it is that cartooning is very much, editorial cartooning is very much sort of literally a black and white medium, where it's much easier to do an editorial cartoon on a topic where you feel very strongly on one side, and where it's sort of an issue that's A and B, black and white. And it's much more difficult to do a cartoon about some topic that has a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different facets about which you may feel different ways. So it's just a matter of looking over what's in the public arena and trying to decide what would be the most important, not only the most important thing to comment on, but what would be easy to do with an editorial cartoon. And it was kind of a daily process that you would go through when I was doing them daily. When I was at the paper, I was doing 5 a week, and even that, there are a lot of things that you just don't have time to hit on. And when you're doing 2 a week, you really have to pick and choose. I know when I retired, one of my friends Dwayne Powell in North Carolina retired right about the same time. And he emailed me and said, "Oh, I'm so frustrated because there's so much stuff that's going on that I'm doing 2 a week and I don't have time to comment on." And I wrote back and I said, "Well, Dwayne, you just have to get used to the idea that there's going to be some topics that the public is just going to be deprived of Dwayne Powell's wisdom." So you have to be sort of philosophical about it. But so there are some sort of technical aspects to it like that are just part of the job.
My name is Albert Sanders. I just wondered if you could make a cartoon of the Republican Supreme Court molding a corporation into a human being.
Well, I think that would make a good cartoon. They're the ones who have told us that corporations are just like human beings. Our would-be President Mitt Romney says that as well. Corporations are people, And the idea that the sort of another way of expressing that is to say that money is speech, and that's just seems wrong to me, and sort of contrary to the spirit of our First Amendment. But I think that would be a good way to express it.
What other countries do you think have a vital tradition of political cartooning?
Well, it's amazing to me how strong a medium. We talked about sort of the decline of newspaper cartooning in the United States, and it's amazing to me what a vital medium it is in other countries, especially where it's dangerous to do these cartoons. At our annual meeting of editorial cartoonists for the last 10 or 12 years, we've done it sort of at the same time. We always do a fundraising event for an outfit called Cartoonist Rights Network, which is sort of like an Amnesty International for cartoonists. It's a group in Virginia that follows the cases of cartoonists in other countries who are being actively persecuted and abused by their governments and by powerful interests in their countries. And they pick out one who has a particularly impressive story for that year and try to get public attention on him so that his government will leave him alone. But it's always astounding to me the stories that these people have. And an American cartoonist will be sitting there looking at his syndicate statement for the month saying, "Oh, I lost 2 papers this month," And some guy in Syria is being thrown in prison and having his hands broken by by government thugs for cartoons he's done. And you realize how fortunate we are in North America to be able to do what we do when there are so many people who are doing it under incredibly hard conditions. And so clearly those oppressive governments and those dictators think that editorial cartooning is a powerful medium. because otherwise they would not be jailing and beating and killing cartoonists. So I would say that, and this seems to be, a lot of this goes on, particularly in the Middle East, and some of the governments there, in Africa, so clearly I would say that those cartoonists I salute them as doing much more vital work than we're doing here. So I would say that in places like that, you do have a very vital and active cartooning tradition that clearly, at least to the people who are being lampooned, they think it's a very powerful medium.
Kent Stewart, first of all, thank you for your cartoons. They are a delight and pointed. The Washington Post has a very interesting takeoff in cartoons, and they have political cartoon animations. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you see that growing as the web grows in importance.
Animation is an interesting, and certainly something that as we moved from print way of distributing what we do to digital ways of distributing what we do, animation was certainly something that immediately occurred to a lot of people. And the course of animation and editorial cartooning so far has been kind of bumpy. I know there was one year in the Pulitzer process when all three of the finalists, a big part of their portfolio was animations. And so my editor at that time, who was on the Pulitzer board, calls me in and he says, "Can you do animation?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, Rich. I can check it out. I can tell you what all it would involve." And about an hour later, I see an email from him to the publisher that said, "Sargent says he can do animations and it won't cost us a dime." I said, "Hold on, Rich." And later I gave him a report that detailed what it would take in terms of my time. I would have to hire probably other people, software, hardware, what all that would involve, because it's a very labor-intensive process, and I never did hear any more about animation in my paper. But there are some people who have done it, and primarily for online consumption. I think people were talking about it as far back as like 70s and 80s, but they were thinking of it, I guess, in terms of television at that time. And then when online media became so pervasive, it was much easier to do animations and to distribute them. A lot of the editorial cartoon animations I've seen are, I would have to charitably describe as lame. They'll be like 3 minutes long, and they're usually a song parody of some kind. And when you're looking at an animation, 3 minutes is an eternity. And you mentioned the Washington Post, and a very good friend of mine, Ann Telnis, who works for the Post, does their animations. And I think that Ann's animations are what, if you're going to do an editorial cartoon animation, it should function like an editorial cartoon. A print editorial cartoon has one impression. Man, there it is. And an animation should be kind of along those same lines. And I think hers are. They last maybe, 15 seconds, something like that. They concentrate on one visual image. There's not a lot going on in the animations. There's kind of one point to it. And that, to me, is more the spirit of animated cartoons. So I'm hoping there'll be more, and I'm sure there will be, because a lot of cartooning is sort of going online. There are lots of cartoonists online now who don't work for a newspaper or anybody else. And I think a lot of them are experimenting with animation. So, yeah, we'll just see what happens. As the software improves and so on, it may become much easier to do very powerful animations.
We have a question back here from Jerry Fraser. Stand up, please.
You see very few or none that do both political cartooning and cartooning in the New Yorker style. Is there a wall between that, or a difference of mindset?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the question was, Bonnie.
Is there a difference of mindset between a New Yorker cartooner and a political cartooner that keeps people from crossing over?
Oh, right. Yeah, between the traditional magazine type of cartooning, like the New Yorker, you're saying, and is there a difference, what the differences are, and is there sort of a wall of separation there between that kind of cartooning and editorial cartooning? I guess there is, in the sense of they sort of they function in such different ways. Although certainly over the years, a lot of cartoons in the New Yorker have been very powerful political statements. I think a cartoon that they had, and my old mind is suddenly forgetting the cartoonist's name, back in the 30s, that was a full-page cartoon that showed a crowd. It's obviously night. There's torchlight. There's a very sort of happy-looking young woman holding up a little child who is looking at something and looking sort of very concerned. And the woman is telling her friend, it's her first lynching. And not only a good cartoon, but really powerful political statement that he made. And so there are a lot of good political cartoons that are sort of gag cartoons in the New Yorker. But I guess a gag cartoon, most of the time, functions sort of in a different way, and is going for the laugh or the sort of wry observation or so on, rather than being concentrated on one political opinion like a newspaper cartoon would be. But so there is some kind of bleeding back and forth, and certainly the style of drawing, the styles of satire and everything from magazine cartooning, certainly with my generation, and some of us were talking about this before this event, the influence of Mad magazine when I was a young man. If you looked at cartoonists of my generation, you could definitely draw a line there of how the style of drawing, the style of presentation, the style of satire, there's a real connection there. So I think there's a lot of sort of cross-pollination in those media.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Two thoughts. First of all, you can't always tell from a cartoon the gender of the cartoonist. Would you think that there's a pretty equal balance between men and women in your business? And the second comment is political cartoons and environmental concerns often overlap, but I don't see very many environmental cartoons that relate to clean air, clean water, pesticides, that type of thing. Is there too much pressure from corporations to prevent that type of thing?
On the first question about women cartoonists, no, it's horribly unbalanced in the editorial cartooning field. I know that my dear friend Signe Wilkinson from Philadelphia once described the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists as an all-white, all-male drinking club that meets once a year, which is fairly accurate. For some reason, there never have been very many women cartoonists. The ones that there are usually very good. Signe Wilkinson, we talked about Ann Telness, both just exceptionally talented cartoonists. There are some others that are mostly online now that there are more women in that field, and some of them very exceptionally talented. And I've never understood exactly why that is. Why it seems to be an almost exclusively male field. I don't think anybody is, at least in the last 40 or 50 years, I don't think anybody's intentionally excluding women from the field. It's like, and I know Signe and I have talked about this ad infinitum, why that is, and I think about the best we've come up with as an explanation is that, and I hope this is not a sexist explanation, but that the way that young girls are raised is to be the ameliators, and that they are the people in a society and in a group that bring people together, and little boys are raised to be aggressive and to confront things and to be the ones who are, splitting things up, and that sort of fits more the way editorial cartoons work. And I think too that probably the young boys are more likely than young girls to be consumers of cartoons, are more likely to read Mad magazine or comic books or things like that, and so when they come to a point where they want to express themselves in a certain medium, they tend to think of cartooning more than a young woman would. But it's puzzled me, and it's always frustrated me, because I know I would love to see it be more equitable in terms of just the balance of women and men cartoonists. Because I think that people like Signe and Anne, they really bring a lot to their cartoons that is distinctly feminine in outlook, and it really gives their cartoons a lot of strength and a lot of power because of that. And as to the environmental question, I know I've done a lot of environmental issue cartoons over the years, and I think maybe the problem is not so much. I mean, I've never been pressured to not do them. I can't speak for other people in the business. I think a lot of times the problem may be just in the daily. If you are a daily cartoonist and you're doing that 5-6 times a week, you tend to start thinking of what you're going to deal with in terms of stories, in terms of particular stories, headlines each day. And I think a lot of the environmental issues we face, as crucial as they are, tend to be things that stretch out over time. They're important every day, all the time. And so sort of, if you're not careful in your mind, they can sort of fade into the background. It is important to deal with that issue every day, but if you have a cartoonist that's just trying to fill up that space for the day, he's going to look for a story that happened that day. And so I think maybe it's more a matter of lazy work habits of cartoonists than it is of particular pressure from anyone. Yeah, unless you have an oil spill every day. You'll see something like the oil spill, then you have 1,000 cartoons about it. That's a perfect example. Whereas, there are oil spills every day. And they, probably taken together dwarf the big oil spill in the Gulf, but they don't get people's attention and they're not a headline. And so you don't have cartoonists dealing with them. I think that's a good example.
I would just like to know if there's any truth to the rumor that Rick Perry receives kickbacks from America's editorial cartoonist for, being Rick Perry.
I don't think he does, but I'm certainly willing to write him a check. I don't know where I'd be without Brother Rick. I mean, he's almost too good a resource. And, how can he almost reaches the point where how can you parody this man?
Yes, I was wondering if you ever had any cartoons that got you in trouble. Did the publisher didn't want to run, or the syndicate didn't want to send out?
Well, in my own case, and the question was whether I have had any cartoons that got me in trouble with the powers that be at the newspaper. I was very fortunate through my career at the American Statesman that I was working, and I always worked with the whole editorial page staff. I mean, I was on the editorial board. We met every day. We talked about what we were going to have on the page, what issues we were going to be dealing with, and exchanged views with each other. And it was always, over my time, was usually a group that I, worked well with, and we were all kind of pretty much along the same ways of thought. I mean, there are certainly many cartoonists who are just absolutely at odds with their editors or their editorial writers and have a very difficult time from day to day. I was fortunate in working on an editorial page that was generally along the same lines as I was politically. So I can't really I can't really think of any specific examples of things that they didn't want to deal with. I think there were some over the years, certainly over the course of doing 8,000 editorial cartoons, you're going to run into a few bumps. And I think there were some where I would show them the rough drawing, and they'd say, let's not go there. And it wasn't always over ideology. Sometimes it might be that they thought maybe there was a taste issue, or maybe they thought there was something like that. So occasionally we would hit bumps like that. I certainly never had any fully drawn editorial cartoons killed. I know they at our editorial cartoonist meetings every year, for many years they've had a thing called the Golden Spike Award. To spike something in newspaper parlance is to kill it, because they used to stick something on a spike on the desk if they were killing it. And people are supposed to bring cartoons that have been killed by their editors, and they have an exhibit of them, and everybody votes on what the best one is. I've never been in that because I've always thought it was. I've never wanted to do all that drawing on something that was not going to run in the paper. So I think I ought to see if I can think of some specific examples for future discussions. But I was very fortunate over the course of my career.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent, for all these years of waking up to you. It was the first thing I wanted to do in the morning was to read the cartoon.
Well, thank you.
Now that you're only doing it twice a week, I find myself looking for John Scherfius from the Boulder Daily Camera. Do you have any favorite cartoonists, maybe young people that are coming up? And I think I saw something that Scherfius has also retired from cartooning. So unfortunately, yeah, John is a very good cartoonist and just an incredible draftsman. He's I like John and his work very much. There are lots of terrific cartoonists who are still in there and doing good work. The one full-time staff cartoonist left in the state of Texas is very good. Nick Anderson over at the Houston Chronicle does a good job. Patrick Oliphant is still turning out good work, and of course you can see his work online quite a bit. And we talked about Ann Telness and Signe Wilkinson, two very preeminent female cartoonists that are doing great work. And there are some young cartoonists online who do some very creative stuff. People like Jen Sorensen, Michaela Reed from Boston, who you have to look up on the internet to find their stuff. But they're doing some very creative stuff, and they may be the things they're doing online may be sort of the future of the medium. Yes, there's still a lot of really good cartoonists who are doing good work, and I always enjoy being a consumer of it myself. Tom Tolles in the Washington Post, a very good cartoonist who sort of has, I think, very much performing in the tradition of Herb Block, who was his predecessor there. So.
Thank you for keeping such a wonderful journalistic tradition
Thank
alive.
You. Thank you for having me.